The dust cloud rose on the horizon like a wall of death, and Lydia Zimmerman knew she had mere seconds before 2,000 head of longhorn cattle trampled her into the prairie dirt. She had been picking wildflowers near the edge of her father's property outside Truckee, California, enjoying the warm August afternoon of 1878, when the ground began to shake. At first, she thought it might be an earthquake, common enough in these parts, but then she heard the thundering hooves and the terrified bellowing of cattle. The herd appeared over the ridge like a living avalanche, their horns catching the sunlight as they charged forward in blind panic. Something had spooked them badly, perhaps a rattlesnake or a cougar, and now they were running with the single-minded terror that made Stampede so deadly. Lydia's basket fell from her hands, scattering purple lupines and Indian paintbrush across the ground. Her horse had bolted the moment the cattle appeared, leaving her stranded in the open with nowhere to run. The nearest tree was too far, the rocky outcropping even farther. Her skirts tangled around her legs as she tried to move, and she stumbled, falling hard onto her hands and knees. The cattle were so close now she could see the wild whites of their eyes, could hear the individual thunder of thousands of hooves striking the earth. She was going to die. The realization hit her with crystal clarity. At 22 years old, with so much life still unlived, she was going to be crushed into the California dirt. She thought of her mother, dead these past 5 years from consumption. At least she would see her again soon. Then a figure appeared from nowhere, riding a powerful bay horse straight into the path of the stampede. The cowboy leaned low over his horse's neck, urging the animal forward with reckless speed. Lydia could only stare as he bore down on her position, his dark hat pulled low against the dust. He was either the bravest man she had ever seen or the most foolish, and right now she did not care which. "Grab on," he shouted, extending his arm toward her as he drew alongside. His voice carried over the roar of the stampede with commanding authority. Lydia reached up without thinking, her hand closing around his forearm as his fingers locked around her wrist. The strength in his grip was tremendous, and he hauled her upward with a single smooth motion that belied the incredible effort it must have taken. She had no time to find purchase or swing her leg over the saddle properly. Instead, he pulled her across the horse in front of him, her body draped awkwardly across the animal's withers. "Hold tight," the cowboy commanded, and then his arm was around her waist, securing her against him as he wheeled the bay horse hard to the right. The cattle were upon them now, close enough that Lydia could have reached out and touched their heaving flanks. The bay horse needed no urging to run. It lunged forward with powerful strides, racing parallel to the stampede's edge. The cowboy guided them with expert hands, finding gaps in the flowing river of cattle, threading through spaces that seemed impossibly small. Lydia felt horns brush against her dangling legs, felt the hot breath of the nearest animals, smelled the overwhelming scent of fear and dust and cattle. Her rescuer never wavered. He kept one arm locked around her waist while the other hand controlled the reins with minute adjustments. She could feel the steady beat of his heart against her back, could hear him murmuring encouragement to his horse. "That's it, Thunder. Good boy. Just a little further." Gradually, agonizingly, they pulled ahead of the leading edge of the stampede. The cowboy angled them away from the herd, putting precious distance between Lydia and the deadly horns. Only when they had gained 50 yards did he slow the horse, letting the animal settle into a canter and then a walk. The stampede thundered past behind them, continuing its mindless rush across the prairie. Lydia realized she was shaking violently, her hands clutched in the bay's black mane. The cowboy's arm was still around her waist, holding her secure, and she was suddenly acutely aware of how improper their position was. Not that propriety mattered much when someone had just saved your life. "Easy now," the cowboy said, his voice gentler than when he had been shouting over the stampede. "You are safe. I have got you." He dismounted with fluid grace, then reached up to help her down. Lydia's legs nearly buckled when her feet touched the ground and his hands steadied her at the elbows. She looked up into his face for the first time and felt her breath catch. He was younger than she had expected, perhaps 25 or 26, with dark hair that curled slightly where it touched his collar. His eyes were a striking shade of gray-green, like sage after a rain, and his face was tanned from long hours in the sun. A few days' worth of stubble shadowed his jaw, and there was a thin scar above his left eyebrow that gave him a roguish appearance. Dust covered his clothes and face, but beneath the grime she could see strong, honest features. "Are you hurt?" he asked, those remarkable eyes scanning her with obvious concern. "Did any of them strike you?" Lydia shook her head, still too overwhelmed to form words. Her hands were scraped from her fall and her dress was ruined, but she was alive. Gloriously, impossibly alive. "Thank you," she finally managed, her voice coming out barely above a whisper. "You saved my life. If you had not come when you did, I would be—" She could not finish the sentence. "But I did come, and you are fine," he said firmly, as though stating an indisputable fact. He pulled a bandana from his pocket and wiped some of the dust from her face with surprising gentleness. "Though you gave me quite a scare, miss. What were you doing out here alone?" "I was picking flowers," Lydia said, feeling foolish now. "I did not think to venture so far from the house. My horse must have sensed the cattle before I did. She ran off and left me stranded." The cowboy's mouth quirked in what might have been a smile. "Smart horse. More sense than to stand in front of a stampede." Unlike her rider, Lydia admitted ruefully. She became aware that his hands were still at her elbows, and she stepped back slightly, trying to restore some semblance of decorum. "I am Lydia Zimmerman. My father owns the ranch about 2 miles east of here." "Ethan Zeller," he replied, touching the brim of his hat in a gesture of respect. "I work for the Triple Bar Ranch. Those were our cattle that nearly ran you down. We have been moving them to new grazing land, and something spooked the herd this morning. I have been trying to get ahead of them and turn the leaders." "Then you were already engaged in dangerous work when you stopped to help me," Lydia said, looking at him with new appreciation. "You could have let them pass and continued your own task." Ethan's expression turned serious. "I could not do that. No cattle are worth a human life, Miss Zimmerman. Not ever." The simple conviction in his words touched something deep in Lydia's chest. She found herself studying him more closely, noting the way he held himself with quiet confidence, the way his hands were rough and calloused from hard work, the way his eyes seemed to look right into her when he spoke. "Your horse bolted, you said." Ethan glanced around the prairie, shading his eyes against the afternoon sun. "She might have run for home, or she could be anywhere within a few miles. Thunder here can carry us both if you need a ride back to your father's place." Lydia hesitated. The proper thing would be to insist on walking, but it was a long way home, and her legs still felt unsteady. Besides, she found herself reluctant to part company with Ethan Zeller just yet. He had appeared like something out of a dime novel, risking his own life to save a stranger, and she wanted to know more about this brave, quiet cowboy. "I would be grateful for the ride," she said, "if it is not too much trouble." "No trouble at all," Ethan assured her. He gathered Thunder's reins and led the horse to a nearby boulder. "Step up here, and it will be easier to mount." With his assistance, Lydia managed to get into the saddle properly this time, arranging her tattered skirts as modestly as possible. Ethan swung up behind her with easy athleticism, settling into the saddle and reaching around her for the reins. Lydia tried not to think about how close he was, how she could feel the warmth of his chest against her back, how his arms bracketed her on either side. "Which direction?" he asked, his breath stirring the loose hair at her temple. Lydia pointed east, and Ethan clicked his tongue to set Thunder walking. The horse moved with a smooth gait that was comfortable even riding double. In the distance, they could still see the dust cloud from the stampede, but the danger had passed. The cattle would eventually tire and slow, and the other triple bar cowboys would gather them up. "How long have you worked for the triple bar?" Lydia asked, wanting to fill the silence with something other than her thundering heartbeat. "About 3 years now," Ethan replied. "I came out from Missouri after my father passed. He had a small farm there, but it was mortgaged to the hilt, and I could not keep it going alone. I heard there was work out west, so I sold what I could and headed for California." "That must have been difficult," Lydia said softly. "Leaving your home, I mean." "It was not much of a home by the end," Ethan admitted. "My mother died when I was young, and my father never really recovered from losing her. He tried, but his heart was not in the farming anymore. Sometimes I think he was relieved to let go." He paused, and Lydia could hear the old pain in his voice. "But enough about my past. What about you, Miss Zimmerman? Have you always lived in Truckee?" "Since I was 10, Lydia said. "We came from Pennsylvania originally. My father wanted to try his hand at ranching, said there was more opportunity out here than back east. My mother was not so sure, but she followed him anyway." Lydia's throat tightened at the memory. "She died 5 years ago, consumption. The doctor said the dry air might help, but it did not." "I am sorry," Ethan said, and the simple words carried genuine sympathy. "It is hard losing a parent. Feels like the world shifts under your feet and never quite settles right again." "Yes," Lydia whispered, surprised by how accurately he had described the feeling. "That is exactly what it is like." They rode in companionable silence for a while, the steady clop of Thunder's hooves providing a rhythmic backdrop. Lydia found herself relaxing against Ethan's solid presence, feeling safer than she had since before the stampede. There was something reassuring about him, something steady and reliable that had nothing to do with the way he had saved her life and everything to do with the kind of man he seemed to be. "There," she said, pointing toward a cluster of buildings that had appeared on the horizon. "That is our ranch. The Lazy Z." As they drew closer, Lydia could see her father emerge from the barn, shading his eyes to watch their approach. Harold Zimmerman was a big man, with shoulders broadened by years of hard work and a face weathered by the California sun. His expression shifted from curiosity to alarm as he took in Lydia's disheveled appearance and the strange cowboy she was riding with. "Lydia," he called out, striding toward them. "What happened? Are you hurt?" Ethan brought Thunder to a stop in the yard and dismounted quickly, then reached up to help Lydia down. Her father was there in an instant, his large hands gripping her shoulders as he looked her over with worried eyes. "I am fine, Papa," Lydia assured him. "But I would not be if not for Mr. Zeller here. There was a stampede, and he saved my life." Harold Zimmerman turned his attention to Ethan, his expression shifting from worry to something else entirely. "You saved my daughter." "I did what anyone would have done, sir," Ethan said, meeting the older man's gaze steadily. "I am just glad I was there in time." "Not anyone would have ridden into a stampede," Harold said gruffly. He extended his hand and Ethan shook it firmly. "Harold Zimmerman." "You have my profound gratitude, Mr. Zeller. If there is anything I can do to repay you, you need only name it." "No payment necessary, sir," Ethan said. "I am just glad your daughter is safe." "Nonsense," Harold declared. "You will stay for supper at the very least, I insist." and I will hear no arguments about it." Lydia saw Ethan hesitate, glancing toward the direction the stampede had gone. "I should really get back to help with the herd. The herd can wait an hour or two," Harold interrupted. "You have done more than your day's work already. Come inside, clean up, and have a proper meal. It is the least we can do." Ethan looked at Lydia, and she found herself nodding encouragingly. She was not ready to say goodbye to him yet, not when she still knew so little about the man who had risked everything for her. "Thank you, sir," Ethan said finally. "I would be honored." Harold clapped him on the shoulder and led them toward the house, calling for their ranch hand to tend to Ethan's horse. Lydia followed, acutely aware of her torn dress and disheveled hair. She must look a fright, but somehow that seemed unimportant. She was alive, and Ethan Zeller was staying for supper. Inside the house, Lydia excused herself to change into a clean dress and repair the worst of the damage to her appearance. She washed the dust from her face and hands, wincing at the scrapes on her palms, and did her best to tame her blonde hair back into some semblance of order. When she looked in the mirror, her blue eyes were bright with an excitement she could not quite suppress. She chose her best everyday dress, a simple but becoming blue cotton that brought out the color of her eyes, and pinned a cameo at her throat that had belonged to her mother. It felt important somehow to look her best, though she told herself it was merely proper manners for a dinner guest who had saved her life. When she returned to the kitchen, she found Ethan at the wash basin, scrubbing the dust from his face and hands while her father looked on approvingly. Ethan had removed his hat and vest, and his dark hair was damp where he had run wet fingers through it. He looked up when Lydia entered, and something flickered in his eyes that made her pulse quicken. "Much better," Harold said, though whether he was referring to Lydia's appearance or Ethan's cleanliness, she could not tell. "Now, Mr. Zeller, you must tell me exactly what happened this afternoon. Lydia said something about a stampede." Over supper, a hearty meal of beef stew and fresh bread that their housekeeper had prepared, Ethan recounted the day's events. He spoke modestly, downplaying his own bravery, but Harold's expression grew more impressed with each detail. Lydia watched Ethan as he talked, noting the way his hands moved to illustrate a point, the way his eyes crinkled slightly when he smiled, the deep timbre of his voice. 2,000 head, you say?" Harold shook his head in amazement. "And you rode straight into them? That takes either tremendous courage or tremendous foolishness." "A bit of both, perhaps," Ethan admitted with a slight smile. "But I could not just leave Miss Zimmerman there. Anyone would have done the same." "I am not so sure about that," Harold said seriously, "but I am grateful you did. Lydia is all I have left in this world. If I had lost her today—" His voice roughened and he cleared his throat. "Well, I am in your debt, Mr. Zeller. Please call me Ethan," the younger man said. "And truly no debt is owed. I am just glad I could help." After supper, Harold invited Ethan to sit on the porch and share a pipe, which Ethan politely declined in favor of a cup of coffee. Lydia brought the coffee out and settled into her mother's old rocking chair, content to listen as the two men talked. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and the evening air was cooling pleasantly. "You said you work for the Triple Bar?" Harold asked, packing tobacco into his pipe. "That is Sam Henderson's spread, is it not?" "Yes, sir," Ethan confirmed. "Mr. Henderson is a fair boss. The work is hard, but he treats his men well and pays on time." "I know Sam," Harold said, lighting his pipe with a match. "Good man. Honest. If you have been with him for 3 years, you must be doing fine work." "Sam does not keep cowboys who do not pull their weight." Ethan looked slightly uncomfortable with the praise, and Lydia found his modesty endearing. So many of the cowboys she had met were full of bluster and tall tales, but Ethan seemed content to let his actions speak for themselves. "I do my best, sir," he said simply. They talked as the stars began to appear overhead, discussing cattle prices and grazing lands, the challenges of ranching in the Sierra Nevada foothills, and the growth of Truckee as the railroad brought more people west. Lydia contributed to the conversation when appropriate, but mostly she just enjoyed watching Ethan, the way the lamplight from the window gilded his profile, the way his whole face changed when he smiled. She realized with a start that she was attracted to him, powerfully so, in a way she had never experienced before. It was not just gratitude for saving her life, though that certainly played a part. There was something about Ethan Zeller that called to something deep inside her, something that recognized a kindred spirit in this quiet, brave cowboy. Eventually, Ethan glanced at the sky and rose reluctantly to his feet. "I should be getting back to the Triple Bar. Mr. Henderson will be wondering where I got to, and I need to help with the gather tomorrow." "Of course," Harold said, standing as well and extending his hand again. "Thank you again for what you did today, Ethan. You will always be welcome at the Lazy Z." "I appreciate that, sir," Ethan said, shaking Harold's hand warmly. He turned to Lydia and his expression softened. "Miss Zimmerman, I am very glad you are safe. Perhaps you will be more careful about wandering too far from home in the future." "I will be much more careful," Lydia promised, rising from her chair. "And thank you again, Mr. Zeller. I owe you everything." "You owe me nothing," Ethan said gently, "but I hope we might meet again under less dramatic circumstances." "I would like that very much," Lydia heard herself say, then felt her cheeks warm at her own boldness. Ethan's smile widened, transforming his face. "As would I. Good night, Miss Zimmerman, Mr. Zimmerman." Lydia stood on the porch and watched as Ethan mounted Thunder and rode off into the gathering darkness, his figure gradually disappearing into the night. She remained there long after he was gone, one hand pressed to her chest where her heart was beating a rapid rhythm. "He is a good man," her father said quietly from behind her. "Brave, honest, respectful, the kind of man your mother would have approved of." Lydia turned to look at her father in surprise. "Papa, I saw the way you looked at him," Harold said, but his tone was gentle, not accusatory. "And I saw the way he looked at you when he thought no one was watching. I'm not blind, daughter." "I only just met him," Lydia protested weakly. "Sometimes that is all it takes," Harold said. "I knew I was going to marry your mother within 5 minutes of meeting her. She thought I was insane, but I was right in the end." His expression turned wistful. "If Ethan Zeller comes calling, he will have my blessing, but the choice, of course, is yours." Lydia felt tears prick her eyes at her father's words. He so rarely spoke of her mother, and the mention of their love story touched her deeply. "Thank you, Papa." "Come inside now," Harold said, putting his arm around her shoulders. "It has been an eventful day and you need your rest." But Lydia lay awake long into the night, replaying every moment from the afternoon. The terror of the stampede, the incredible relief of Ethan's rescue, the warmth of his arms around her, the sound of his voice, the way his eyes had met hers in the lamplight. She had thanked him for saving her life, but she found herself hoping that this was not the end of their story, but rather the beginning. The next week passed with agonizing slowness. Lydia found herself watching the road, hoping to see a lone rider on a bay horse appear on the horizon. She helped her father with the ranch work, tended the vegetable garden, and did all her usual chores, but her mind kept drifting back to Ethan Zeller. Her father noticed her distraction but said nothing, merely watching her with knowing eyes. On the 8th day after the stampede, he announced that he needed to ride into Truckee to pick up supplies and asked if Lydia would like to accompany him. "I thought we might stop by the Triple Bar on the way back," he added casually. I wanted to thank Sam Henderson for employing such fine cowboys. It would be the neighborly thing to do. Lydia knew her father well enough to recognize that this was as much for her benefit as anything, and she felt a rush of affection for him. That would be very kind, Papa. Truckee was bustling with activity when they arrived, the main street crowded with wagons and horses. The railroad had brought prosperity to the small town, and new buildings were going up all the time. Harold conducted his business at the general store while Lydia browsed the fabric selection, trying not to watch the door every time she heard footsteps. They were loading their purchases into the wagon when a familiar voice called out behind them. "Mr. Zimmerman! Miss Zimmerman!" Lydia spun around to see Ethan striding toward them, his face breaking into a smile. He was dressed much as he had been the last time she saw him, in worn denim and a faded work shirt, but he had clearly made an effort to clean up. His hair was neatly combed, and his boots were polished. "Ethan," Harold greeted him warmly, shaking his hand. "Good to see you again, son." "How did the gather go?" "We got most of them rounded up," Ethan reported. "Lost a few over the ridge, but overall not too bad considering how spooked they were. Mr. Henderson sends his regards, by the way." I told him what happened, and he was mighty relieved that no one was hurt. "I was actually planning to stop by the Triple Bar on our way home," Harold said. "But since you are here, perhaps you could save me the trip. Please give Sam my thanks for having such capable men in his employ." Ethan looked pleased but embarrassed by the compliment. "I will tell him, sir. Thank you." There was a brief pause, and Lydia could feel her father looking between her and Ethan with barely concealed amusement. "You know," Harold said suddenly, "I just remembered I need to stop by the land office. Some paperwork I forgot about. Lydia, why do not you wait here with the wagon? I will be back in about an hour." Before either of them could respond, he was striding down the street, leaving Lydia and Ethan standing alone in the afternoon sunshine. Lydia felt her cheeks warm at her father's obvious matchmaking, but when she glanced at Ethan, she saw that he was smiling. "Your father is not very subtle, is he?" Ethan asked, his eyes dancing with amusement. "Not even a little bit," Lydia admitted, laughing. "I apologize for him." "Do not apologize," Ethan said quickly. "I was hoping I might see you again, but I could not figure out a good excuse to ride out to the Lazy Z. I did not want to presume." "You would not have been presuming," Lydia said softly, meeting his eyes. "I have been hoping you might visit." Ethan's expression turned serious, and he took a step closer. "Miss Zimmerman, I know we have only just met, and I know I am just a cowboy without much to offer, but I have not been able to stop thinking about you. Would you allow me to court you properly? With your father's permission, of course." Lydia's heart soared. "I believe my father already gave his permission," she said. "And yes, Ethan, I would very much like that." The smile that spread across Ethan's face was like the sun breaking through clouds. "Would you walk with me for a bit? I know a nice spot by the river if you would like to see it." Lydia glanced at the wagon, then back at Ethan. Her father had said he would be gone an hour, and the river was not far. "I would love to." Ethan offered his arm, and Lydia took it, feeling the solid strength of his muscles beneath her fingers. They walked through town, drawing a few curious glances from passers-by, but Lydia did not care. Let people talk. She was with Ethan Zeller, and that was all that mattered. The river rang clear and cold from the Sierra Nevada snowmelt, burbling over smooth stones. Ethan led her to a spot beneath a stand of cottonwood trees where the bank was grassy and pleasant. They sat side by side, maintaining a respectable distance, and watched the water flow past. "I was afraid I had imagined it," Ethan said after a moment. "The connection I felt when we met, I thought perhaps it was just the circumstances, the danger and the fear that made everything feel more intense." "I felt it too," Lydia admitted. and I do not think it was just the circumstances. I have never felt this way before, Ethan. It frightens me a little. Why frightening? He asked, turning to look at her. Because it is so sudden, Lydia said, and so strong. What if we are mistaken? What if this feeling fades? Ethan was quiet for a moment, watching the river. My mother used to tell me that love was not about never having doubts. It was about choosing someone despite the doubts, about building something together day by day. I did not understand what she meant when I was young, but I think I am starting to now. That is wise, Lydia said softly. I cannot promise you that this will last forever, Ethan continued, his voice earnest. I cannot see the future any more than you can, but I can promise you that I will do my best to be worthy of your trust. I can promise you honesty and respect and all the care I have to give. If that is enough, then I would very much like to see where this leads. Lydia felt tears prick her eyes at the simple sincerity of his words. This was no flowery declaration or grand romantic gesture. It was just Ethan, honest and true, offering her everything he had, and it was more than enough. It is more than enough, she said, reaching out to take his hand. His fingers closed around hers, warm and strong, and she felt a sense of rightness settle over her like a blanket. They sat by the river until they heard the town clock chime the hour, then reluctantly made their way back to the wagon. Harold was already there, looking entirely unsurprised to see them arrive together and still holding hands. "Have a nice walk?" he asked innocently. "Very nice, sir," Ethan replied, not letting go of Lydia's hand. "Mr. Zimmerman, I have asked your daughter if I might court her properly, and she has agreed. I wanted to make sure that was acceptable to you." "More than acceptable," Harold said firmly. "You are welcome at the Lazy Z anytime, Ethan. In fact, why do not you come for Sunday dinner this week? We usually eat around noon." "I would be honored, sir," Ethan said. "Thank you." They parted ways with promises to see each other soon, and Lydia climbed into the wagon beside her father, feeling as though she were floating. The ride home passed in a pleasant haze, and even her father's gentle teasing could not dampen her spirits. True to his word, Ethan appeared on Sunday morning, riding Thunder and carrying a bouquet of wildflowers that he must have picked on the way. Lydia accepted them with a delighted smile, touched by the simple gesture. Over the next few months, Ethan became a regular presence at the Lazy Z, visiting whenever his duties at the Triple Bar allowed. They spent long afternoons walking the property, talking about everything and nothing. Ethan told her about growing up in Missouri, about the hard years after his mother died, about his dreams of one day having his own ranch. Lydia shared her memories of Pennsylvania, of her mother's gentle ways, of her adjustment to life in California. They discovered they both loved watching the sunset, both preferred coffee to tea, both had a fondness for chocolate cake. Ethan taught Lydia to whistle, and she taught him a card game her mother had shown her. They argued amiably about whether horses or cattle were more intelligent, and whether the railroad was ultimately good or bad for ranching communities. Harold watched their courtship with approval, often finding excuses to leave them alone together, though always maintaining the proprieties. Lydia knew how lucky she was to have a father who trusted her judgment and respected her choices. As autumn turned to winter, Lydia found herself falling more deeply in love with Ethan with each passing day. It was not the wild, desperate passion of romance novels, but something quieter and deeper. It was the way he always made sure she was comfortable before seeing to his own needs, the way he listened when she talked about missing her mother, the way he treated her father with genuine respect and affection. It was also the way her heart leaped when she saw him riding up the road, the way his touch made her skin tingle, the way his kisses, stolen on the porch when her father was not looking, left her breathless and wanting more. In December, on a crisp winter evening with snow dusting the ground, Ethan asked Harold for Lydia's hand in marriage. Harold gave his blessing without hesitation, and Ethan presented Lydia with a simple gold ring that had belonged to his mother. "It is not much," he said as he slipped it onto her finger, "but it is all I have to give you right now. Someday, I promise, I will get you something finer." "It is perfect," Lydia said, tears streaming down her face as she looked at the plain gold band. "I do not want anything finer. I just want you." They were married in February of 1879, in a simple ceremony at the small church in Truckee. Sam Henderson and the other Triple Bar Cowboys came to the wedding, as did several of Harold's ranching friends. It was a modest affair, but the joy was genuine, and when Ethan kissed his bride, Lydia felt as though her heart might burst from happiness. They had no money for a honeymoon, so they spent their wedding night in the small cabin that Harold had built for them on the Lazy Z property. It was just 2 rooms, sparsely furnished, but it was theirs. Ethan carried Lydia over the threshold, and they lay together for the first time as man and wife, discovering each other with tenderness and growing passion. Afterward, as they lay in each other's arms, Lydia traced the scar above Ethan's eyebrow. "How did you get this?" she asked. "Horse threw me when I was 14, Ethan said. "Hit my head on a fence post. My father said I was lucky it did not kill me." "I am glad it did not," Lydia said, kissing the scar gently. "I am glad you are here with me." "There is nowhere else I would rather be," Ethan murmured, pulling her closer. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Ethan continued working for the Triple Bar while helping Harold with the Lazy Z in his spare time. Lydia managed their small household and assisted her father with the ranch accounts, which she had a natural talent for. They saved every penny they could, dreaming of the day when they might have their own spread. The first real test of their marriage came in the spring, when Ethan was injured during a roundup. His horse stepped in a prairie dog hole and went down hard, pinning Ethan's leg beneath it. Sam Henderson brought him home in a wagon, his face grim. "Leg's broken," Sam said as they carried Ethan into the cabin. "Doc Mason said it, but he said Ethan needs to stay off it for at least 6 weeks. Lydia felt her heart clench with fear as she looked at her husband's pale, pain-drawn face. "Will he be all right? Doc says he should heal up fine," Sam assured her. "But he will not be much use for ranch work for a while. If you need anything, you just send word to the Triple Bar." Over the following weeks, Lydia discovered reserves of strength she had not known she possessed. She nursed Ethan through the worst of the pain, changing his bandages, bringing him food and water, reading to him when he was restless and bored. She also took on more of the work around the Lazy Z, rising before dawn to help her father with chores. Ethan chafed at his enforced idleness, frustrated by his inability to work and provide. More than once, Lydia found him trying to get out of bed against doctor's orders, and she had to use all her powers of persuasion to keep him resting. "I hate being useless," Ethan said one evening, his voice bitter. "You married a cowboy, not an invalid." "I married you," Lydia said firmly, taking his hand. "For better or worse, in sickness and in health. Remember those vows. They apply to both of us, Ethan. You saved my life once. Let me help save yours now by making sure you heal properly." Ethan's expression softened, and he pulled her down for a kiss. "What did I do to deserve you? You rode into a stampede for me," Lydia reminded him with a smile. "I would say that earned you some consideration." As the weeks passed, Ethan's legs slowly healed. He graduated from bedridden to hobbling around on crutches, and finally to walking with just a slight limp. By summer, he was back to work, though Lydia noticed he was more cautious now, more aware of his own mortality. In August, A year after the stampede that had brought them together, Lydia realized she was with child. She waited until she was certain before telling Ethan, wanting to be sure. When she finally shared the news, his reaction was everything she had hoped for. He swept her into his arms, laughing and crying at the same time, and spun her around despite her protests. "We are going to have a baby," he kept saying, as though he could not quite believe it. "We are going to be parents." Harold was equally delighted, already making plans to expand the cabin to accommodate his future grandchild. The next months passed in a flurry of preparations. Lydia sewed tiny clothes and blankets while Ethan and Harold built a cradle from smooth pine wood. The baby came in April of 1880, on a warm spring night when the air was full of the scent of apple blossoms. It was a long labor, and there were moments when Lydia thought she could not bear another minute of the pain. But Ethan stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her forehead, murmuring encouragement. When their son finally entered the world, red-faced and squalling, Lydia felt a love so powerful it took her breath away. Ethan cut the cord with shaking hands, and when the doctor placed the baby in his arms, Lydia saw tears streaming down her husband's face. "He is perfect," Ethan whispered, looking down at their son with wonder. "Lydia, he is perfect." They named him Thomas, after Ethan's father, and the little cabin became a place of joy and laughter. Thomas was a good baby, healthy and strong, with his father's dark hair and his mother's blue eyes. Watching Ethan with his son filled Lydia with a contentment she had never imagined possible. But life on a ranch was never easy, and challenges continued to come. When Thomas was 6 months old, a severe drought struck the region. Water became scarce, and grazing land dried up. Cattle prices dropped as ranchers were forced to sell off stock they could not feed. Harold and Ethan worked from dawn to dusk, trying to keep the lazy Z afloat. They hauled water from the river, moved the cattle to whatever grazing they could find, and watched their savings dwindle as they bought feed to supplement the sparse grass. Lydia did what she could to help, managing the household on ever-tightening funds and caring for Thomas while also helping with the ranch work. One night, after a particularly difficult day, Lydia found Ethan sitting on the porch steps, his head in his hands. She sat down beside him, Thomas sleeping in her arms. "It is too much," Ethan said quietly. "The drought, the low prices, the bills piling up. I cannot provide for you and Thomas the way I want to. Maybe I should give up this dream of ranching and find other work. The railroad is always hiring." "Is that what you want?" Lydia asked gently. "No," Ethan admitted, "but what I want does not seem to matter much these days." "It matters to me," Lydia said. "Ethan, we have been through hard times before. Your broken leg, remember? We got through that together, and we will get through this together too. I did not marry you for easy times. I married you because I love you, because you are brave and good and honest, because you never give up, even when things seem impossible." Ethan looked at her, his eyes reflecting the lamplight from inside the cabin. "You could have married someone with better prospects, someone who could give you more than a 2-room cabin and constant worry about making ends meet." "I married the man I love," Lydia said firmly. "The man who saved my life. The man who gave me Thomas. Everything else is just details." Ethan pulled her close, careful not to wake the baby, and pressed his forehead against hers. "I love you, Lydia Zeller. I love you so much it scares me sometimes." "I love you too," Lydia whispered. "And we are going to get through this, together." The drought finally broke in the fall, and with it came renewed hope. The next spring brought good rains, and the grass came back thick and green. Cattle prices began to recover, and slowly, gradually, things improved. Harold's health, however, began to decline. He had never been the same since the drought years, and by the spring of 1882 it was clear that he was failing. Lydia spent as much time as she could with her father, knowing their time together was limited. Harold doted on young Thomas, now 2 years old and talking in full sentences. On warm days, they would sit on the porch together, Harold telling stories of Pennsylvania and the old days, Thomas listening with wide-eyed fascination. One evening in May, Harold asked to speak with Ethan privately. They went into Harold's room, and when they emerged an hour later, Ethan's eyes were red. Harold called Lydia in next, and she saw how tired he looked, how the life seemed to be slowly draining from him. "The ranch is going to be yours and Ethan's when I am gone," Harold said without preamble. "I have already drawn up the papers with the lawyer. The Lazy Z will pass to you." "Papa, do not talk like that," Lydia protested, even though she knew this day had been coming. "You are going to be fine." "No, sweetheart, I am not," Harold said gently, "and that is all right. I have lived a good life and I am ready to see your mother again. But I need to know that you and Thomas and Ethan will be taken care of. The ranch is not much, but it is something. You can build on it, make it into something bigger." Lydia felt tears streaming down her face. "I do not want the ranch, Papa, I want you." "I know," Harold said, reaching out to take her hand. "But we do not always get what we want. I am proud of you, Lydia. Proud of the woman you have become, proud of the family you have built. Your mother would be so proud too." Harold Zimmerman passed away 3 days later, with Lydia and Ethan at his bedside. They buried him next to Lydia's mother in the small cemetery outside Truckee, and Lydia grieved for the father who had been her rock through so many storms. But grief, while sharp, did not stop life from moving forward. The Lazy Z was now theirs, and with it came both opportunity and responsibility. Ethan threw himself into the work with renewed determination, and Lydia discovered that she had inherited her father's talent for managing a ranch. They started small, buying a few head of cattle when prices were low and selling when the market was good. Ethan's reputation as a skilled cowboy brought opportunities their way, and Sam Henderson, now an old friend, often sent business in their direction. Slowly, steadily, the Lazy Z grew. In 1883, Lydia gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Margaret after Lydia's mother. Thomas, now 3, was fascinated by his baby sister and appointed himself her protector. Watching her children together, watching Ethan teach Thomas to ride while Margaret watched from her mother's arms, Lydia felt a deep sense of peace. Life was not always easy. There were still hard winters and dry summers, still bills to pay and mouths to feed. But there were also moments of perfect joy. Family dinners around the table Ethan had built with his own hands, Thomas's first successful attempt to rope a fence post, Margaret's first steps, the quiet evenings on the porch, watching the sunset with Ethan's arm around her shoulders. One evening in the summer of 1885, as they sat watching Thomas and Margaret play in the yard, Ethan turned to Lydia with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever think about that day?" he asked. "The Stampede?" "Sometimes," Lydia admitted. "Why do you ask?" "I was just thinking about how everything that matters to me now came from that moment," Ethan said. "If I had been 5 minutes later, if I had not seen you, if thunder had not been fast enough," he shook his head, "it all could have been so different." "But it was not," Lydia said, taking his hand. "You were there, you saved me, and I am grateful for that every single day." "I think you saved me right back," Ethan said quietly. "Before I met you, I was just drifting, working to survive but not really living. You gave me something to live for, Lydia. You and the children. You made me want to be better, to build something that would last. We built it together," Lydia reminded him. "Everything we have we made as a team." "Together," Ethan agreed, pulling her close. always together. The years continued to pass, marked by growth and change. Thomas grew into a strong, capable young man who loved ranching as much as his father did. Margaret proved to have her mother's head for numbers and her father's way with animals. In 1888, Lydia and Ethan welcomed a third child, another son they named William after Ethan's grandfather. The Lazy Z prospered under their stewardship, expanding from Harold's original 200 acres to over 1,000. They built a proper house to replace the little cabin, though they kept the cabin intact as a reminder of where they had started. Ethan became known throughout the region as a fair and honest rancher, and their cattle were sought after for their quality. But success and prosperity, while welcome, were not what mattered most. What mattered was the family they had built, the life they had created together. It was the sound of their children's laughter, the warmth of Ethan's hand in hers, the satisfaction of a hard day's work well done. On their 10th wedding anniversary in February of 1889, Ethan surprised Lydia with a gift. He led her out to the old cabin, now used for storage, and presented her with a portrait he had commissioned from a traveling artist. It showed the two of them on their wedding day, young and hopeful, standing together against the world. "I wanted you to have something to remember," Ethan said. "Something that showed how we started, so we never forget what really matters." Lydia felt tears welling up as she studied the portrait. They looked so young, she thought, so naive about what life would bring. But the love in their painted eyes was real now as it had been 10 years ago. "Thank you," she whispered, turning to embrace her husband. "It is perfect." "You are perfect," Ethan murmured, holding her close. "Thank you for taking a chance on a cowboy with nothing but a good horse and a brave heart." "That cowboy saved my life," Lydia reminded him. "And then he gave me a life worth saving. I would take that chance 1,000 times over." They stood there in the old cabin, surrounded by memories, and kissed with all the passion and tenderness that a decade of marriage had only deepened. Outside, they could hear Thomas calling for them, Margaret's delighted laughter, baby William's happy gurgling. The sounds of the family they had created, the life they had built. As they walked hand in hand back to the house, Lydia thought about that day so long ago when a stampede had nearly ended her life. She had thanked Ethan then for saving her, never imagining that she would spend the rest of her life being grateful for that moment. Never imagining that her gratitude would transform into a love so deep and abiding that it had indeed saved him back, pulling him from a life of lonely drifting into one filled with purpose and joy. The years continued to roll by with increasing speed, as they always do when life is full and happy. Thomas, at 19, showed every sign of being the rancher his grandfather and father had been. He had his father's steady nature and his mother's quick mind, and Ethan often joked that the boy was better at ranch management than he had ever been. Margaret, at 16, had grown into a beautiful and intelligent young woman. She had inherited Lydia's blonde hair and Ethan's gray-green eyes, along with a fierce independence that sometimes worried her parents, but mostly made them proud. She could rope and ride as well as any cowboy, but she also loved books and learning, often riding into Truckee to visit the small library that had opened there. William, at 11, was the wild card of the family. He had a mischievous streak that kept everyone on their toes, but beneath the pranks and the energy was a kind heart and a sharp intelligence. He wanted to be a veterinarian when he grew up, fascinated by the health and care of animals in a way that went beyond simple ranching knowledge. In 1896, Lydia and Ethan celebrated their 17th wedding anniversary. The Lazy Z was now one of the most successful ranches in the Truckee region, and they had become pillars of the community. Ethan served on the town council, and Lydia had helped establish a school that served the ranching families scattered across the valley. That spring brought an unexpected challenge when a group of land speculators from San Francisco arrived in Truckee, buying up properties and trying to force out the smaller ranchers. They offered Ethan and Lydia an enormous sum for the Lazy Z, more money than they had ever imagined having. "We could sell," Ethan said one night as they discussed the offer. "Take the money, move to San Francisco or Sacramento. The children could have opportunities we never dreamed of." "Is that what you want?" Lydia asked, echoing the question she had asked him so many years ago during the drought. Ethan looked around the parlor of the house they had built together, at the marks on the doorframe showing how the children had grown, at the photograph of Harold that sat on the mantel, at the life they had created here. "No," he said finally. "This is our home. This is where we built our life together. I do not want to leave it, no matter how much money they offer." "Neither do I," Lydia said with relief. "This land holds our history, Ethan. Your father's ring that I still wear, my mother and father buried in the cemetery, the cabin where we spent our first night together. How do you put a price on that?" They refused the speculator's offer, and when several other ranchers did the same, the San Francisco group eventually gave up and moved on to easier targets. The incident only strengthened the sense of community among the ranching families, and that summer they held a celebration that brought together everyone in the valley. At the party, held on the grounds of the Lazy Z, Lydia found herself watching Ethan as he talked with their neighbors and friends. His hair was starting to show threads of silver now, and there were lines around his eyes that had not been there when she first met him. But he was still the same man who had ridden into a stampede to save her life, still brave and honest and true. As if sensing her gaze, Ethan looked up and smiled, that same smile that had made her heart flutter nearly 2 decades ago. He excused himself from his conversation and made his way through the crowd to her side. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, slipping his arm around her waist in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. "About how lucky I am," Lydia said honestly. "About how that day with the stampede changed my entire life." "Our entire lives," Ethan corrected gently. "I was just existing before I met you, Lydia. You made me want to be more, to do more. Every good thing in my life started with you." "We saved each other," Lydia said, leaning into his embrace. "You saved my life that day, but I think I saved yours too. We gave each other a reason to build something real, something lasting." "The best thing I ever built was this family," Ethan said, looking around at Thomas, now dancing with a girl from a neighboring ranch, at Margaret, laughing with her friends, at William, showing some of the younger children how to skip stones in the pond. "And I could not have done it without you." As the sun set over the Lazy Z that evening, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Lydia reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. It had not always been easy. There had been hardships and heartaches, losses and challenges. But through it all, they had faced everything together, their love growing deeper and stronger with each passing year. The night of the party, after all the guests had gone home and the children were asleep, Lydia and Ethan took a walk under the stars. They wandered out to the site where the stampede had occurred all those years ago, now just peaceful pastureland where their cattle grazed contentedly. "You ever regret it?" Ethan asked suddenly. "Marrying a cowboy instead of someone with better prospects?" Lydia stopped walking and turned to face him, taking both of his hands in hers. "Ethan Zeller, in all the years we have been married, I have never once regretted choosing you, not during the hard times, not during the good times. You are the best man I know, and I would choose you again in a heartbeat. Even knowing how hard it would be sometimes," Ethan pressed. "Especially knowing that," Lydia said firmly. "Because the hard times taught us how strong we could be together. They showed us what really mattered. I would not trade a single moment of our life together, not even the difficult ones." Ethan pulled her into his arms, holding her close under the vast canopy of stars. "I love you, Lydia. I will love you until the day I die and beyond." "And I love you," Lydia whispered against his chest. "My brave cowboy who rode into a stampede for me. My partner, my best friend, the father of my children. I love you more than words can say." They stood there together, two people who had found each other in the most dramatic of circumstances and built a love that had withstood every test. Around them, the night was peaceful, the only sounds the gentle lowing of cattle and the whisper of wind through the grass. The turn of the century brought new changes and new challenges. Thomas married his sweetheart in 1899, and by 1900, Lydia and Ethan were grandparents to a beautiful baby girl named Sarah. Watching Ethan hold his granddaughter with the same tenderness he had shown their own children filled Lydia's heart to overflowing. Margaret surprised everyone by announcing that she wanted to attend university in San Francisco to study education. It was an unconventional choice for a ranch girl, but Ethan and Lydia supported her decision, proud of her ambition and intelligence. She left in the fall of 1901, promising to come home often. William, true to his childhood dreams, was apprenticing with the veterinarian in Truckee, learning everything he could about animal medicine. At 16, he was already showing remarkable skill, and the old doctor often said that William had a natural gift for the work. In the spring of 1903, on a beautiful May morning, Lydia woke to find Ethan already up and standing at the window of their bedroom, looking out over the ranch. She joined him, slipping her arm around his waist. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "I was thinking about that day," Ethan said softly. 25 years ago this summer, the Stampede, meeting you, how my whole life changed in the span of a few minutes." 25 years, Lydia marveled. "Where did the time go?" "Into building this," Ethan said, gesturing at the vista before them. The lazy Z spread out in all directions, a testament to years of hard work and dedication. "Into raising our children, loving each other, creating a life together." "Do you have any regrets?" Lydia asked, echoing his question from years earlier. "Not a single one," Ethan said immediately. "Every choice I made that led me to you was the right one. Every hard day, every setback, every challenge was worth it because I got to face it with you by my side." Later that summer, they held a celebration to mark their 25th wedding anniversary. It was a grand affair, with friends and family coming from all over the region. Thomas and his wife brought little Sarah, now a precocious 3-year-old. Margaret came home from San Francisco with stories of city life and her studies. William helped organize everything, his natural enthusiasm making the party a joyful occasion. During the celebration, Ethan stood up to make a toast. 25 years ago, he began, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd. "I was just a cowboy working for wages, with no real plans beyond the next day's work. Then one afternoon, I saw a stampede bearing down on a young woman who had no way to escape. I rode in to save her, thinking I was being a hero, but the truth is, she saved me just as much as I saved her." He looked at Lydia, his eyes shining with emotion. "Lydia, you gave me a reason to be better, to work harder, to build something that would last. You gave me a family, a home, a purpose. My gratitude for having you in my life has turned into a love so deep that I cannot imagine existing without you. You saved me, darling. Every single day, you continue to save me." There was not a dry eye in the crowd as Ethan raised his glass. "To my wife, my partner, my best friend. To 25 years together, and to many more to come." The party continued late into the night, with music and dancing and laughter. But eventually, as the guests began to depart and the children headed to bed, Lydia and Ethan found themselves alone on the porch of their home, just as they had been so many times over the years. "Thank you," Lydia said softly, leaning her head on Ethan's shoulder. "For what?" he asked. "For being the man who rode into that stampede," she said. "For choosing to save me instead of just doing your job. For building this life with me. For loving me so well for all these years." "Loving you has been the easiest thing I have ever done," Ethan said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "And the most rewarding. You are my everything, Lydia." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. Around them, the lazy Z was quiet, the cattle settled for the night, the land peaceful and prosperous. It was the product of a quarter-century of hard work, but more than that, it was the physical manifestation of their love, their commitment to each other, and to building something that would last beyond their own lifetimes. In the years that followed, that legacy continued to grow. Thomas took over more of the day-to-day running of the ranch, allowing Ethan to step back slightly while still remaining involved in the major decisions. Margaret graduated from university and returned to Truckee to establish a school for ranch children, bringing modern educational methods to the valley. William completed his training and set up practice in town, becoming the region's first dedicated veterinarian. More grandchildren arrived, filling the lazy Z with the sound of young voices and laughter. Lydia and Ethan watched with pride as their children raised families of their own, passing down the values and lessons they had learned. The importance of hard work and honesty. The value of family and community. The power of love to overcome any obstacle. In 1908, at the age of 51, Lydia found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this point. She was sitting in the parlor, working on a quilt for her newest grandchild, when Ethan came in from checking the cattle. Despite the silver in his hair and the slight stiffness in his gait from old injuries, he was still the same man she had fallen in love with 30 years ago. "Come sit with me," she invited, patting the sofa beside her. Ethan settled down with a contented sigh, and Lydia set aside her quilting to lean against him. "I was just thinking," she said, "about how grateful I am for that stampede." Ethan laughed softly. "Only you would be grateful for nearly being trampled to death." "Not for the danger," Lydia clarified. "For what it brought me. For you. For this life we have built together. I think about who I would have been if that day had never happened, if you had not been there to save me, and I cannot imagine it. This life, our family, everything we have created together, it all started with your bravery that day." "And your gratitude," Ethan added, pulling her closer. "You said thank you, and somehow that thank you turned into this, into us, into everything that matters. Gratitude that turned into love," Lydia said softly. "Love that saved us both. You saved my life that day, but Ethan, your love has saved me every day since. It has given me strength when I was weak, hope when I was discouraged, joy when I was sad. You saved me in every way that matters." "And you saved me right back," Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion. "From loneliness, from aimlessness, from a life half-lived. You made me whole, Lydia. You gave me everything I never knew I needed." As the afternoon light slanted through the windows, casting golden shadows across the room, they sat together in perfect contentment. Outside, they could hear the sounds of ranch life continuing. Thomas calling instructions to the hands. The laughter of grandchildren playing in the yard. The gentle lowing of cattle and the whinny of horses. It was the sound of the life they had built together. A life that had started with a stampede and a rescue, with gratitude and growing affection, with love that had deepened and matured over 3 decades. It was a life neither of them would have chosen differently, given the chance. The years rolled on, bringing both joys and sorrows as years always do. In 1912, they celebrated their 33rd wedding anniversary with another large gathering. All 3 of their children were there with their own families, and the Lazy Z rang with the voices of 7 grandchildren ranging in age from infant to teenager. Watching the next generation play together, Lydia felt a deep sense of satisfaction. They had done it. She and Ethan had taken the gift of that second chance at life and built something beautiful and lasting. The Lazy Z would continue long after they were gone, carried forward by their children and grandchildren. That night, after everyone had gone home or to bed, Lydia and Ethan took a walk out to the old cabin where they had started their married life. It was maintained now as a sort of museum, a reminder of humble beginnings. Inside were some of their first pieces of furniture, the cradle Ethan had built for Thomas, photographs chronicling their life together. "You remember our wedding night?" Ethan asked, his arm around Lydia's waist as they stood in the doorway. "Every detail," Lydia said with a soft laugh. "You were so nervous you knocked over the water pitcher." "I was terrified," Ethan admitted. "Terrified of disappointing you, terrified of not being the husband you deserved." "You have exceeded every expectation," Lydia assured him, turning in his arms to face him. "You have been everything I ever hoped for and so much more. You are my hero, Ethan, not just because you saved me from that stampede, but because you have saved me every day since with your love, your kindness, your unwavering devotion." "My brave Lydia," Ethan murmured, cupping her face in his weathered hands. "My partner in everything. I love you more today than I did on our wedding day, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today. Every day with you has been a gift." They kissed there in the doorway of the old cabin, 2 people who had built a lifetime of love from a single moment of courage and a simple thank you. The gratitude Lydia had felt that day had indeed transformed into a love that had saved them both, giving them purpose and joy, trials and triumphs, and a legacy that would continue for generations. As they walked back to the main house hand in hand, the moon rising over the Sierra Nevada peaks in the distance, Lydia reflected on the truth of what Ethan had said in his anniversary toast all those years ago. She had saved him just as surely as he had saved her. They had rescued each other from lives half-lived, from loneliness and uncertainty, and together they had built something beautiful and true. The Lazy Z would stand as a testament to that love long after they were gone. But more than the land or the cattle or the buildings, their true legacy was in the family they had raised, the love they had shared, the example they had set. 3 children who knew what it meant to commit to something bigger than themselves. 7 grandchildren who would grow up knowing that true love was not just passion but partnership, not just romance but respect and dedication. In the end, that was the real story. Not just that a cowboy had saved a woman from a stampede, though that was how it started. The real story was what came after. The gratitude that grew into affection, the affection that deepened into love, the love that sustained them through 3 decades of joys and challenges. The love that had indeed saved them both in every way that mattered. As Lydia and Ethan prepared for bed that night, moving around their bedroom with the comfortable familiarity of long marriage, Lydia caught sight of her reflection in the mirror. She was 55 years old now, her blonde hair streaked with gray, her face lined with the marks of a life well lived. But when she looked at herself, she saw not the passage of time but the accumulation of precious moments. Every laugh line earned by joy, every silver hair a badge of experiences shared. Ethan came up behind her, meeting her eyes in the mirror. "You are as beautiful now as you were the day I first saw you standing in that field," he said. "You are a terrible liar," Lydia said with a laugh, "but I love you for it anyway." "I am not lying," Ethan insisted. "Maybe you look different, but you are still the same woman who looked up at me with those blue eyes and trusted me to save her. The same woman who thanked me for doing what any decent man would do. The same woman who saw something in a dusty cowboy worth taking a chance on." "I saw everything worth seeing," Lydia said, turning to embrace him. "I saw a hero, a partner, a man I could build a life with, and I was right." They climbed into bed and Ethan pulled Lydia close, their bodies fitting together as naturally as two pieces of a puzzle. This too was part of their love story, this comfortable intimacy. The way they knew each other's rhythms and needs, the way they could communicate with a touch or a look. "Ethan," Lydia said softly into the darkness, "if you could go back to that day, knowing everything that would come after, all the hard times along with the good, would you still ride into that stampede?" "In a heartbeat," Ethan said without hesitation. "Every challenge was worth it, Lydia. Every hard winter, every dry summer, every worry and setback. It was all worth it to have this life with you." "That is how I feel too," Lydia whispered. "Thank you for saving me." "Thank you for saving me right back," Ethan murmured, pressing a kiss to her hair. They fell asleep in each other's arms, as they had done for more than 3 decades, as they would continue to do for years to come. The lazy Z was quiet around them, settled for the night. But it hummed with the energy of life and love, of family and legacy, of a story that had started with a stampede and a rescue, and had grown into something far greater than either of them could have imagined. The cowboy had saved her from the stampede, yes, but her gratitude had turned into a love that had saved him right back, pulling him from a life of lonely wandering into one of purpose and joy. Together, they had built not just a ranch but a life, not just a family but a legacy. And in doing so, they had proven that the truest kind of heroism is not found in a single moment of courage, but in the daily choice to love, to commit, to build something that will last. Their story would continue through their children and grandchildren, through the land they had tended and the community they had served. But at its heart would always be that moment when a cowboy rode into danger to save a stranger, and that stranger's gratitude bloomed into a love that changed both their lives forever. A love that saved them both in every way that mattered, and gave them a life worth living and a legacy worth leaving behind.